And those tools are very
with no
relevant
problem.
today. Very relevant today.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this was LinkedIn back when I was discovered. It was in 2011. LinkedIn has changed a lot since then. Obviously, it's becoming more of a marketing platform, a publishing platform for people to publish articles, pieces, blog posts. But it also has become more of a professional recruiting network where you can pay a premium and target candidates more so that way. But back then, there were fewer people on LinkedIn, so it was a smaller community, and there was more interaction. And the value of a LinkedIn user was probably greater than it is today, because now anyone and everyone who is either job hunting or has a job is on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, I hope people will take that advice to heart that are listening to the show, because the show is about saying yes to opportunities, and that's an incredible way to find opportunities. I know the job search boards on LinkedIn are pretty impressive as well, because they are based on, without even searching, your background and your likes and dislikes, and then from there you can dial that in more to expand, other options, if you want to go into marketing or food and beverage, and keep plugging away. But I was really impressed with their job boards as well.
Yeah, it's really easy to apply on LinkedIn now, because if you have a profile, it's really easy to search for jobs. And then now you just literally click two buttons and you've applied to jobs as well. So LinkedIn, like I said, it's changed, I think, for the better. Certainly as a company gets bigger, there are pros and cons to it getting bigger, and they're doing very well financially. If you look at their stock, they're doing extremely well. They keep growing their user base. But when it comes to actually helping people, I'm a success story for LinkedIn.
Yeah.
They helped me not only get my first full-time job out of school, but they helped me enter into a completely new industry that I would have never imagined, really changing the trajectory of my professional life and my personal life as well.
Yeah, awesome. I'm going to cheat a little bit, because I know for sure I've got 2 listeners that are talking about writing books. And from your website, I see that you've written at least 4 books that are posted up here. And I'd like to get a couple seconds, maybe a couple minutes from you on what inspired you to write some of these books and how you got started. And obviously, we know one is a bestseller here, but how does one go about getting into that field, if you will?
Yeah, so I brought up earlier that I was always interested in writing, reporting. That's kind of, I would say I'm pretty strong and experienced on that side of the brain. I was a former reporter, journalist, and media member of the media. I've always had a passion for writing and for teaching as well, so reporting stuff, teaching. I've worked at the large financial marketing company I told you about. They were really a publishing company, a financial publishing company.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really my background and my experience. And I've always wanted to write. Now, with the advent of self-publishing, now anybody can become an author. Anybody can become a writer and sell books. I told you I've sold more than 10,000 copies of Podcastnomics. With my other books combined, I've probably sold a grand total of more than 15,000 books, if you include all my books.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually just came out with a new book last week called From Nobody to Best-Selling Author. If you go to Amazon, type in my name, Naresh Vissa, or From Nobody to Best-Selling Author, really type in my name, and you can see all of my books that I've written. My first major book was Podcastnomics, which came out in 2014, and the book really was a primer on podcasting from soup to nuts.
Uh-huh.
And in 2014, podcasting was still relatively new. And the genesis of the book was dealing with my clients or dealing with potential clients and leads. I was answering the same questions. I was taking the same calls. So that became somewhat frustrating, just saying the same things over and over again. And at the same time, it was wasting my energy in that I would talk to all these people, couldn't close the deal. So I ended up wasting a lot of time. And then on top of that, it was the clients who I did have, they weren't listening to what we would tell them to do on marketing their podcast, monetizing their podcast. So instead of dealing with my frustrations, banging my head against the wall, I said, you know what, the way I'm going to fight back is I'm going to sit in front of my computer. I'm going to write a book.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it all in writing, and then I'm going to publish it and sell it for $5. And that way, if people want to meet with me or whatever, I'll say, hey, you know what? Here's a free copy of this book. Just read the book. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with me. All the answers are in the book, and I published a book, and like I mentioned earlier, it's gone on to sell more than 10,000 copies. So to answer your question, it was frustration that led me to write the book. And for every book thereafter, there was Podcastnomics, and there was 50 Shades of Marketing, which is a primer on 21st century online and digital e-commerce and marketing. That was also probably a result of frustration. Then there was the New PR, which is a primer on online 21st century public relations. And that was, I wouldn't say that was a source of frustration. That one was the most popular chapter for my book, 50 Shades of Marketing, was the New PR.
Uh-huh.
So I expanded on that topic to create, just a shorter book. And then my books thereafter, Trump book last year was a reaction to the 2016 election and the role that the online and digital marketplace played in the election and helped President Trump get elected.
Uh-huh.
And then this year, what is From Nobody to Best-Selling Author, which is a primer or a how-to on how anybody can, how a nobody like me can become a best-selling author. Mm-hmm. And it walks people through that process.
That's an incredible journey. What's interesting is I have a mentor that I use, become good friends with, David Meltzer, who's written several books. And the first time I wanted to reach out to David, I said, hey, let's go grab a cup of coffee. And he goes, I don't do coffee. You can meet me at my office if you like. I'll give you some time and we can talk. But, he was very pointed about that. I thought, gosh, okay, that sounds good. But in your case, it doesn't sound like you do coffee either, but you can buy your $5 book, which would be probably less than a coffee these days, save some money for somebody, but they're going to get all the information that they might have gotten over coffee with you. And I think that's an incredible resource at a great price. I've scanned through the notes on all your books. I was particularly interested in the Trump book, but really a great resource that you provided for people out there. And I hope whoever's listening that they go on your website and look at some of these books, because like I said earlier, I get a lot of calls from people that want to do podcasts and get involved in this. And I think you've got all the answers right there for them.
Yeah, well, I recommend people, if they go to my website, nareshvissa.com, they can see all my books. We have the new one coming out on the site, From Nobody to Best-Selling Author. That'll be up later today because it just came out a few days ago, last week, to be more precise. But I also want to offer to your listeners, whether it's going to nareshvissa.com, go to nareshvissa.com, get on my mailing list. And after you get on my mailing list, send me an email saying you heard me on this show. And I'll send you a free copy. You pick your book. I'll send you a free Kindle version and a free audiobook, Audible version. I'll send you a code so that you get the full price off, so you get it for free. If your listeners do that, I'd be glad to send you copies. And if you want multiple books, I'll go ahead and send you multiple books as well. That's one offer that I'm giving to your listener.
That's great. We really appreciate that, because I think information is the key to people's success, and not making a whole bunch of left turns before they see that success. And clearly, you've had enough education and background to get people where they want to be, at least in these topics. Can you tell us a little bit about really the state of podcasting today and where it looks like for the near future? It feels like there's a lot of podcasts out there, but I see people digesting them more and more every day because they're so easy to get involved with and from a listener standpoint.
Yeah, so podcasting, this is really an undertaking that I think more and more individuals and more businesses should look into. And the reason why I say that is because we're still young. I mean, I talked about, 2011, 2014. It sounds like a while ago, but podcasting is now finally hitting the mainstream. The first podcast back in the end of 2014, Serial, kind of was the introduction of podcasting into the mainstream. And then now more and more people, it's becoming the thing rather than hey, what are you watching on Netflix? What are you watching on Amazon Prime? Or what are you listening to on the radio? Now it's, oh, have you listened to this podcast? Have you listened to that podcast? And Hollywood and private investors, venture capital companies, they're now getting involved in podcasting, whether it's a technology side or content production. It's only becoming bigger. And so right now, iTunes has more than 500,000 podcasts. Only half of those are active. So that means the rate of failure or just people quitting is almost 50%. It's incredibly high.
Yeah.
So it is harder to do than starting a blog. Starting a blog, you just go on Blogger or any of those blogging sites, and you just takes 10 minutes to create a profile, and then you can start blogging away. In the case of podcasting, it requires a little bit of investment. The Podcastnomics walks you through that investment. It's just a few $100s. It requires a lot of time investment, a lot of sweat equity investment, finding good guests, content creation. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it, which is why 50% of podcasts fail. But if you do make it, and one of the recommendations we have is you have to stick with it over the long haul. You have to do it for at least 9 months. You're not going to see results overnight. But if you stick with it over the long haul, then you essentially become a major player in your industry, especially if you're in a niche industry.
Yeah.
So we recommend that podcasters get into a niche industry. So, for example, if you are, let's say, a radiologist, go to your iTunes podcast app that comes with every iOS device and type in radiology or radiologist, see what's currently out there. And you'll probably see there's not a whole lot, probably nothing on there. That presents a tremendous opportunity to start a podcast in radiology. And once you start that podcast, now you interview other experts in your field. So in radiology, you interview other radiologists, famous radiologists, and you become that guy, that connector, that networker. You become that guy with the podcast, and all sorts of opportunities open up for you. Speaking at conferences, becoming that industry expert, et cetera. So to give you some data, if Madison Square Garden, when I say there are more than 500,000 podcasts on iTunes, the ratio of bloggers to podcasters right now is about 2,000 to 1.
Wow.
That's as of a few months ago. Now, what does that mean? That means if you go to Madison Square Garden to a New York Knicks game and you fill up the garden, it's a packed house, all the people sitting in the seats on nosebleeds down at the bottom bowl, all those people are your bloggers. And the 10 guys who are playing on the basketball court, those are your podcasters. So that just goes to show the visibility and the power of podcasting that you get.
Amazing. And like you said, the cost of entry into podcasting, it's a relatively low investment, but you do have to commit the time, the effort, and the energy and the work to get good guests on there and have good topics. But I've also seen what you're talking about when you can be very targeted in a niche industry where you can really stand out as well.
Absolutely. Yep. You're absolutely right about that. And that's why the beginning of the book, Podcastnomics, really focuses on that idea of microcasting and niche. So niche marketing, finding that niche. And when I say niche, I mean, if you say, oh, my passion is sports, I want to start a podcast about sports. Well, that's not niche, because what are we talking? Are we talking basketball, baseball, football, even international sports, cricket, curling, shooting, rifling, Olympics? Is chess even a sport? I mean, it's on ESPN sometimes. Is the spelling bee a sport? ESPN broadcasts that too. So that's very niche, that's not very niche.
Yeah.
When I say niche, I mean starting a podcast about the National Spelling Bee, starting a podcast about the 2020 Olympics. That's what I mean by niche. Even getting even more niche. Okay, well, if you want to start a podcast on basketball, that's still too broad. How about starting a podcast on the Golden State Warriors or on LeBron James? Now that's more niche, and you're going to get higher quality, more targeted audience that way. People, if they want general sports, they can turn on ESPN. That's what ESPN is for. That's what Fox Sports is for. If people want to, if they want right-wing politics, they can turn on Fox News or Rush Limbaugh. It's already there. But if you